All right, guys, welcome to my Articulation Masterclass. This is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to talk about a bunch of different exercises, etudes, phrases, and even solo transcriptions. And we're going to get into different ways to articulate with all of these. And we're especially going to talk about a sort of uniform approach that I find is the best way to really approach jazz articulation. So let's get right into that. So the kind of common misconception about jazz articulation is that you just articulate the offbeats. In other words, you just hung on the upbeats, and then on the downbeats you slur. So that's sort of the first misconception about jazz articulation. When in reality, you're really tonguing on the downbeats a lot of times, especially when you're going up, and then you're tonguing on the offbeats when you're going down. So again, the misconception is that we only tongue on the offbeats, but the reality is we do mixtures of both. And it really depends on the shape of the line. In general, when you're going up, you're going to articulate on the downbeats, and when you're going down, you're going to articulate on the upbeats. So really what it takes is just starting to apply this sort of thing to the exercises and solos that you're working on and really becoming aware of it so you can start integrating it into your own playing. So first, let's start with just understanding this concept with a bebop scale. So a bebop scale is something that I'm sure a lot of you already know, but just in case you don't, a bebop scale is just when you add a chromatic approach note into a major scale, a dominant scale, or a minor scale. Now, bebop scales are really great to practice with articulation, so that's one of the reasons why we're starting with this. I feel that bebop scales really only cover a small fragment of what's so great about melodic chromaticism in jazz. That's one of the reasons why I've released ebooks on this concept of approach notes and closures, because bebop scales are great in that they take one approach note, but there's really so much more that you can do with it. However, again, it's a great way of getting into articulation. So we're going to start with bebop scales, and you'll see later on why this is really just the square one, because as we get into different exercises and different shapes, we're going to see how we have to use a combination of the downbeat articulation and the upbeat articulation. So first off, what are these two articulations? The downbeat articulation is when you go doodin, 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 dood, doodin, 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 etc., etc. You just keep on doing that. And then if you're going up, and then the when you're going down, the offbeat articulation is do dau 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 dau. If that's not making sense to you yet, don't worry. We're going to be pretty much spending all of the masterclass on this concept and variations therein. Now, I feel very strongly, I'm sure some people would disagree with me, but in my opinion, I feel very strongly that everyone from Lester Young to even Michael Brecker, has used this. Like all the jazz legends have used this uniform approach to articulation. Now, that being said, there are very different ways that you can sound using this essentially pronunciation of the words that we're speaking. There are different ways that you can do it more aggressively. You can do different parts of the tongue. We'll talk about all this in a bit. But I think that this uniform articulation is really the approach that everybody uses, whether they know it or not. So throughout this, masterclass, you'll get a sense of, if that really resonates with you. I hope it will. But that's what we're here for. We're going to go through this concept, and I hope you get something out of it. So to get started here, on the bebop scale, and just real quick for anybody who doesn't already know, with the major bebop scale, that's where we're going to start. The major bebop scale, we're going to add the chromatic in between 5 and 6 of the major scale. That's how the major bebop scale works. That way, the 1, 3, 5, and 6 of the major scale, those are really chord tones of a major sound. The 1, 3, 5, and 6 are going to be on the downbeat. Now you'll notice I didn't say 7. That's because on a major sound, a really traditional major sound, the 6 is really, just as much of a chord tone as the 7. A lot of pianists will use the 6 in their chord voicing. So point is, especially the 1, 3, 5, that's really the base of the major sound. Those are on the downbeats, and then the 6 is the 6 is on the downbeat as well. I had to think about it for a second because of that chromatic approach note that we're adding in. So I'm going to play it in the key of G major for me. So that's going to be concert F major. All right, so don't worry, we're going to take this real slow and we're going to break it down. But what just happened was I did the doo-dun articulation going up and the do-da-oo-da-hoo going down. Now again, the common misconception is that we only do offbeats. We only articulate offbeats in jazz. Check out what that would sound like. Now that's fine, but what will a lot of times happen is that will lead into having kind of a redundant sort of even gallopy type of sound. Now if we take it a little bit more up tempo and we pretend that I'm really playing on a song, it's going to sound like this. All right, so that offbeat articulation, that is the misconception of how to articulate in jazz. That is not true. That is not how we want to approach it. This is what it's going to sound like when you've got the downbeat articulation going up and then the offbeat articulation going down. I'm not going to exaggerate it as much, so it'll be. All right, so that is going to sound a lot hipper. And when you get into all sorts of combinations with shapes, different shapes and different melodic contours of the line, when you're not just going up and down, you're really going to get a sense for why that works. So here is an example of that. All right, so there, of course, I was throwing in some other rhythms, some triplets and 16th notes. We'll get into that later. But for now, as you might have noticed, when I was going up, I was doing downbeats. When I was going down, I was doing offbeats. It's okay if you're still feeling like, whoa, a lot of things happening and I'm not getting it yet. Don't worry, we're going to break it down really slow now. So, do. How does that work? Well, I'm going to get saxophone specific here, but this does kind of apply to a lot of different instruments. I've even been in a masterclass where I told a drummer to work on her ride cymbal sound by going do. And it actually helped, her swing feel a lot. So, this can really apply to any instrument. So when we do do, when we do do, what's happening in the mouth here? And I would encourage you to say this with me. Do. Okay, so the tongue goes to the roof of the mouth after you say do. So if you imagine that you do that on your instrument, you're going to have do. So for now, don't even play your instrument, just do. So what's happening on that second note? Notice on that second note, do. The tongue is staying on the roof of my mouth. Do. All the way until I play that third note. Do. And don't be shy about singing this right now because it's going to be one of the most effective ways of really absorbing this information. Again, we got do. So now I'm doing the first 5 notes. Do, 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 do. Even slower. Do, 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 do. Now on the sax. Now, of course, you wouldn't actually play it that slow, but this is just to help you get the hang of it. All right, so a lot of people ask me, at this point, all right, how are you still sustaining the sound on that second note? How are you still sustaining the sound on that second note? Well, really, you have to have a lot of diaphragm support. So what I'm doing is I'm pushing harder and harder from the diaphragm to show you how I'm able to keep on playing that note. Even though my tongue is actually on the reed and really choking off the reed. Now, a lot of people ask you at this point, what part of the tongue do you use? Where do you tongue on the reed? Do you use the side of the reed? For me, I never use the side of the reed personally, but I've heard of people doing that. For me, I'm always just tonguing in the middle. I even use the middle of my tongue. Now, some people use the tip of their tongue. Some people use the back of their tongue. I take the happy medium with everything. I use the middle of my tongue. The tip of the tongue would sound like this. The back sounds like this. I'm really trying to exaggerate. So it gets a lot of bite, but it can really get kind of loosey-goosey like that. You would have to practice it a lot to really get the hang of that sort of thing. I like taking the happy medium. So there's the punch that you get from being towards the back, but still kind of the lightness, the nice lightness that you get from being in the front. All right, so to recap, we really want to just take it really slow and focus on the first 2 or 3 notes to get a hang of this do and do, because this is going to be the hardest part. So I'm just going to do that a few more times. All right, and now I'm going to play the major bebop scale a few times just so you can play along with me. 2, 3, and 4. All right, and so what I would recommend is doing an exercise like this, just really slowly until you start to get the hang of it. Now remember, this is not going to be something that you're going to get down in a day or even a week necessarily, but after a few weeks, you can certainly get the hang of it. And you might even start to be able to have this come out in your playing after a day or two. But if you're going to pull that off, the most important thing is going to be doing it really slowly. And then ultimately, it's going to be important to apply it to all sorts of phrases and etudes and solo transcriptions, which is what we're going to get into later on. But for now, what we're going to do is just go through some exercises with variations of this articulation, because the shape is going to change a lot. But before we do that, just one more thing. I'm going to play a dominant bebop scale through the keys, because this is a great thing to practice, just learning your dominant bebop scales through the keys. And I'm going to use this articulation, and I'm going to do it more at a medium tempo. If you've got this exercise down, being able to play the bebop scales through the keys, you're welcome to play it along with me. I'm just going to go up in half steps, starting on concert F. 1 octave each. And I'll catch you off. 1, 2, 3. All right, so no worries if you're not getting it yet. Again, this is going to be something that you're going to have to absorb gradually, but it will happen. Just be patient. And so now we're going to start using variations of the do-do and the do-da-oo-da-oo, because we're going to start moving shapes around with various exercises. So this first exercise that you'll see, this is going to be a cool scale exercise where the shape really twists and turns a lot in each bar, and then we just work the same shape up each scale degree. So that one is going to sound like this. But before I play the whole thing, what I'd like to do is just go over the articulation. So notice, when we go down, we articulate the offbeats, right? However, in the beginning of this, we only go down for one note. And when we go down for one note, we're coming from the downbeat. So on the downbeat, we always want to start with an articulation. Of course, we could start with a breath attack or something like that. But in general, for me, I'm always starting by articulating the downbeat I'm always starting by tonguing the downbeat, by articulating the downbeat. So then from there, when we go down a half step and back up to the original note, because it's a major scale exercise, then from there, we're still doing an upwards shape. So we've tongued the first note, and then we go down, but we don't continue down. So in this case, we're going to articulate when we come back up. So we'll go do-do. Do, because we're still going up. So it'll be do. Then we start to go down. So it'll be do, da, do. Sorry, do, da, do. Then we go down for a second. So do, da, do. Do, da, do. So notice you've got all this written out for you on the screen here and in the supplemental PDF. So this is going to help a lot. Make sure you're saying it. Don't be shy about vocalizing this. And then now let's give it a go. Let me count you off. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And then just so you can hear it real fast, zipping through it. And then a goal tempo would be 1, 2, 1, 2. Oh. All right, so now for the descending version of this exercise, we're going to turn that shape around, and we're going to go doon doo da da doon doo da da doon doo doon doo da da doon doo da da da. A little slower. 2, 3, 4. Doon doo da da doon doo da da da. It'll sound like this. Up to tempo. 1, 2, 3. All right, so we're going to do a couple more diatonic scale exercises. I think it's a couple. Let me double check that. Yeah, we're going to do a couple more diatonic scale exercises. And then from there, we're going to get on to the good stuff. We're going to start adding the melodic chromaticism that I was talking about, going beyond the bebop scales. So these next two exercises are going to be very similar shapes, but they just sort of have a skip or a jump in a slightly different part. So in the first one, the skip or jump is at the end, and in the second one, the skip or jump happens in the middle of the shape. So we're going to have slight variations to the articulation. For the first one, we're going to have doodin doodin doo dao, doodin doodin doo daoodin, doodin doodin doo daoodin. You can say that with me. 3, 4. Doodin doodin doo daoodin, doodin doodin doo daoodin. Now I'll take it up to tempo. 1, 2, 3. 2, 3. Then when we go down, we've got doodin doo dao daoodin, doodin doo dao daoodin, doodin doo dao daoodin. All right, now for the last diatonic exercise that we're going to do, now we're going to have that skip is going to be in the middle. So it's going to be doon doo dao daoodin, doon doo dao daoodin. Say that with me slowly. 3, 4. Doon doo dao daoodin, doon doo dao daoodin. I'm playing it. 3, 4. Up to tempo. 2, 3. All right, so for the descending version of that exercise, what we'll do is we'll turn the shape around, and then we'll go doodin doo tau tau taoodin doo tau tau tau. Doodin doo tau tau taoodin doo tau tau tau. So up to tempo. 2, 3, 4. All right, so going on from there, now let's start adding chromatic approach notes into our exercises. Again, if you've watched my YouTube videos, then I'm sure you've seen me talk about how I think that a bebop scale is really just the tip of the iceberg as far as all the chromatic approach notes and enclosures that you can get into in your playing, in your technical development, and the exercises you're practicing, and the phrases that you're creating, and everything. So now let's start adding some chromatic approach notes. and figuring out the articulation that we'll do for these exercises. All right, so for this first exercise, we have just a chromatic approach note at the end of every measure. So on the end of 4 is where we do the chromatic approach note. Sometimes that chromatic approach note will be going down, and sometimes that chromatic approach note will be going up. So when we go down into the next note, we're going to articulate the offbeat. And then when the chromatic approach note is bringing us up into the next note, then we're going to do an do to get into that downbeat of the next bar. So on the end of 4, we're going to go and then on the downbeat, we're going to go do on the downbeat, do. So this exercise will sound like this. All right, so real slow, it's do 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 da do do da do. So you'll see with this exercise, we actually have the articulation written out in every single bar because it's going to change a little bit at the end of each bar. There's going to be the one variation where we articulate the end of 4 going into the downbeat, and then we slur that downbeat because we're going down. And again, there will be that one version where we go up into the note and we go do. So I'm going to play this exercise slowly. 1, 2, 3. All right, and now up to tempo. 1, 2, 3. And real fast, just so you can hear it at a blazing fast tempo. 1, 2. And descending, we're gonna go do 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 do. Same thing. Sometimes the chromatic approach note is gonna go up into the note. Sometimes it's gonna take us down. All right, so now we're going to go into an enclosure exercise. So the same idea, we're going to be adding chromatic approach notes, but with enclosures, the chromatic approach notes wrap around the note. So we'll have one note that's above and one note that is below, or sometimes the inverse of that, one note that's below first and then above. Anything is fair game, but the point is we're going to have chromatic approach notes coming from all sides, from above and below. That's what makes it an enclosure. So for this next exercise, we're going to have do do ta ta do do ta ta do do ta ta do. And so notice for this exercise, we're back to having simile written for the second bar of the articulation and onwards. So from here, we really just have the same articulation pattern on every measure, just like we had for those diatonic exercises previously. So this one will sound like this. 1, 2, 3. Up the tempo. 1, 2, 1, 2. Then we'll turn the shape around. We'll have do 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 da do 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 da do. Do 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 da do 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 da do 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 da do. All right, so next we're going to do a really common arpeggio exercise. So this arpeggio exercise is just going to build up the diatonic sequence. What the diatonic sequence is really just the modal sequence, which is just chords building from every degree of the scale. If you skip every other note, you're going to build on an arpeggio from there, and it's going to line up with how the modal system works. So we have a major chord, a minor chord, another minor chord, a major chord, a dominant chord, a minor chord, a half diminished chord, and then we're back at the top. So for the articulation on this, we're going to do the same articulation pattern all the way through. It will be do do ta hoo do ta do do ta hoo do ta hoo do. So do do ta do ta do ta do ta. So pretty much we're doing the do and do up, and then we do a da that slurs downward really far into the next downbeat in the next arpeggio shape. All right, so now for the descending version of the arpeggio exercise, what we do is do da oodin, 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 do. So we're doing the opposite. Now we have a do for that wide jump going up. We have an do to get into the downbeat. 1, 2, 3. All right, so now in this next exercise, we're actually going to have an exception to the rule here. So now we're going to articulate the offbeats all the way through, even though we're going up. It's just one of those things, and every once in a while, we'll run into an exception of the rule. It just sounds more musical to just do the offbeats on this one. So that's going to sound like this. We're just adding chromatic approach notes to the last exercise that we did. And then when we go descending, it will sound like this. So same thing, just offbeats all the way through there. That's going to be one of our exceptions to the rule. All right, so now we're going to do an exercise that ties in more to modern language. This is going to use the melodic cells concept. Now, I really feel that every jazz legend from Lester Young to Michael Brecker really used this type of do-do or do-da-oo-da-oo type of articulation. They just had variations, well, we always have variations in the shape, and that's what we're going over now, but they also had just different ways that they felt it, different ways that they tongued, different ways they felt the music, the subtleties, but still their pronunciation. It's almost like just the way you pronounce words. Everybody had kind of a similar accent going in how they've approached this music. So again, we're going to talk about this a little bit more when we get into the transcription section, but for now we're going to do some language that's more modern in its approach as far as exercises go. And so melodic cells, it gets this effect that Brecker was definitely known for, where you're taking these 4-note cells and moving them around and using them as a vehicle for improvisation. And when you listen to the articulation of this type of thing, it would sound like this. And then if you do it really fast, you can still keep this articulation going, and we'll talk about this more in a second. All right, so that's just to give you a sense of how you really can do do-and-dos and do-da-oos no matter what style of jazz you're playing. And I know I mentioned that we would talk about how it happens from Lester Young to Michael Brecker. So right now, and we'll get into this a little bit more later when we do the transcription part, but right now here's just a little example of Lester Young playing with also a do-and-do articulation, but just in a very different style. So notice when it gets to this part. Now we did see an exception in the beginning. Sometimes people do like to articulate every note. It's a common misconception that Dexter Gordon always did that. That's not true. Dexter Gordon would really only do that at slower tempos. But when he was at faster or medium tempos, he was also doing the do-and-dos and the do-da-oo-da-oos. We'll talk about that more later. But again, that's just an example of using this type of articulation approach across styles. All right, so bringing it back to the melodic cells, now let's just check this articulation approach out on a more modern concept. We're doing a technical exercise now with this melodic cells approach, which I was talking about in reference to Brecker. And so this is going to sound very modern here. And a lot of times the exercises can be more chromatic if you're doing the chromatic versions of it, but you'll see in a second we'll also do a diatonic version. So let's just start with this chromatic version now. All right, so for this first exercise, we're going to have do-ta-oodin, 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 do-ta-oodin. This is a really common chromatic shape that's great to get down. Now up to tempo, 1, 2, 3. And when we go down, we go do-da-oo-da-oo-da-oo-da-oo-da-oo. All right, so now we're going to do one more chromatic exercise with these melodic cells. Now we're going to turn the shape around. So we're going to go do-do-do going up and do-da-oo-da-oo going down. All right, so now we're just going to do one diatonic cell to wrap up the diatonic section. So with this one, we're going to go do-do-ta-oo-do-ta-oo-do. Do-do-da-oo-do-da-oo-do-da. Up to tempo, 1, 2, 3. Going down. Do-do-da-oo-do-da-oo-do-da-oo-do-da. All right, so now let's do a couple triplet exercises. Triplets are a little trickier than the eighth notes because we're playing 3 notes per beat, and what we have to do with the articulation gets a tad bit harder. But there is one way we can do it that's really straightforward and a little bit easier, and that's just going to be by playing the downbeats. So we'll get to that in a second. By now you might be asking, well, are we going to get into 16th notes today? We're going to get into 16th notes a bit in the transcription section, but remember 16th notes are essentially just very fast 8th notes. So everything that we've done with the 8th notes, you'll eventually be able to do with 16th notes as well as you get faster and faster with this stuff. But it's not something that you necessarily have to practice as a separate concept. Now, sometimes when you're playing through transcriptions or when you're soloing, the 16th notes will be really fast and you'll just kind of slur through the whole thing. So we'll check that out a little bit later on. But really, triplets are the main other rhythm that we need to get a handle of. So that's what we're going to do now. So with these triplet exercises, we're going to do an approach note exercise and an enclosure exercise. Again, enclosures are just approach notes that go around the note. And again, we're going to have two options. So there's the first option that's going to be a little easier, and then the second option that's pretty hard. So first, we just want to start with that first option that's just playing the downbeats. And so essentially that's going to sound like this. 2, 3, oh. Really straightforward. Up to tempo. 1, 2, oh. And don't worry, when I say up to tempo, when I say up to tempo, I'm more referring to just a goal tempo. Of course, when you're practicing this stuff, and when I practice this stuff, you want to practice it very slow and get it down really cleanly, very slowly before you ever get into these fast tempos. Just want to give you an idea of your goal down the line. So again, all I'm doing here is I'm just articulating the downbeat of every beat. So one every 3 notes essentially, because we're playing triplets. All right, so now for this trickier articulation, this is going to be really hip if you can get it down. What we're going to do is we're going to articulate some more notes. So we're still going to be, focusing on these downbeats, but essentially we're going to, fit in a little articulation where in between the second and third notes, we sort of get the tongue suppressing a little bit of both of the notes, kind of the latter end of the second, and then definitely suppressing the third or ghosting the third. So it's gonna be like do 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 3 4 do 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 do. Let's do that slowly. 2 3 4 do 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 do. Now even slower now. 3 4 do 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 do. It's gonna sound like this. Then when we turn around the shape, we're going to do that same thing going down. So do, 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 do. It's very tricky, but if you can get a hang of it, it's going to be, it's going to sound super hip when you're throwing in triplets into your solos. All right, so next we're going to apply that same articulation pattern to this triplet enclosure exercise. So again, do, 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 do. It's going to sound like this. All right, so real tricky, but again, just like with all this stuff, you just want to become aware of it first. You want to mess around with it a little bit day by day, and eventually, as you focus on it over the course of a few weeks, it's going to start to work out. Definitely in a few months, you'll get the hang of it. But the first step is always taking it as slow as you can and pronouncing it as well as playing it, pronouncing it with your tongue. So do, 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 do. So that second note is essentially getting a breath attack. Do, do. So do, 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 do. So good luck with this one. It's going to be super effective if you can get it down. Be patient with it and take it slow. All right, so now we're going to check out some cool phrases in order to, start using these articulation patterns in sort of real life situations here. And so these phrases are going to be from my book on approach notes and enclosure phrases. And these are going to be really useful because we're going to have a lot of, straightforward jazz language. We're going to check out these 8th note based phrases. And with all these different shapes, it's going to give us an opportunity to do different combinations of the do-and-do-and-do's and the do-da-oo-da-oos. Again, just a quick review. The do-and-do's are the downbeat articulation that we do when we've got a couple notes going upwards. And then do-da-oo-da-oos, that's going to be when we're going downwards. So we're really going to get a sense of how we put this into real life application with playing some real phrases here. All right, so for this first phrase, you'll see it's going to start kind of like a major bebop scale. going downwards. And so we'll do the do, da, ta, to start. And you'll see we've got, descending notes all the way until we get to beat 4. So it'll be do, da, ta, n. On the end of 4, you'll go into an n. We do that because the n is going up into the next note. Whenever we're going up into a downbeat, that's when we're going to do an n-do. So we've got n-do, da-oo, n-do. So from the end of 4, it's going to be n-do, da-oo, n-do. So from the start, from the top, it's going to be do, da-oo, 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 n-do, da-oo, n-do. Do, da, 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 do, da, do. Now, when you practice this stuff, I encourage you to really try to play, your eighth notes pretty straight, because the articulation in itself is going to really make the line feel good. So you're not going to have to think too much about swinging the eighth notes. You want the eighth notes to be pretty even, and the articulation is going to make it swing on its own. So this first phrase is going to sound like this. Now with these phrases, a lot of times it's really great to do a workout where you take it through the keys. If you want, you can write it out through the keys. You can check out our PDF ebook of this where we've got it out for you through the keys, or you can transpose it on your own. But it's just a great way of really enforcing the articulation. All right, so now let's go on to the second phrase. So we see in the second phrase, we do start going ascending. So we'll go do for those first few notes. And then look at that. We've got a note that goes down from beat 2 to the end of 2. But we're still going to do an do because we want to look at the note after that ends up being an upward motion. So we've got do to start. Even though we've got that note that goes down for a second, it doesn't continue down. So when a note goes down, but then it goes up, you're going to do an do there. So we've got do, and then look at that, we've still got notes going up. So do, da-oo. So on the end of 4, that's the first time when we've got a downward motion. On the end of 4, into beat 1 of the next bar. So do, da-oo. And then we have upward motion again into beat 2 of the second bar. So so from the beginning, do, ta-oo, It's going to sound like this. Do 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 da da da. Do 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 da 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 da. All right, so phrase 3 is going to be kind of tricky. This one's going to sound like this. Do da 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 do da do. Do da 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 do da do. Real slow. 3 and 4. Do da 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 do da do. So to start, we're just going downwards. That's why we've got the do da da's. Then we've got this enclosure that ends up being do da getting into it from the beginning. Do da tauden. So the enclosure ends up being tauden do, and to land on the downbeat tauden do, and then from that downbeat we've got do tauden do. Again, when we're going down to start that second bar, do tau. But then we go up into beat 3, so do tauden do. Second bar is. and then the whole phrase. All right, so by now you should start to kind of understand how this works, and you've got it all written out for you. I'm just gonna play through the rest now at various tempos so you can get a hang of it, and feel free to play it along with me. Here's phrase 4. 1, 2, 3. A little faster. 1, 2, 3. All right, this is phrase 5 now. I'm just gonna say this one because it's a little bit trickier. It's gonna be do 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 da da do 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 da da da. And then up to tempo. All right, now on phrase 6, we're gonna have a little 16th note gesture. So this one's gonna sound like this. I'll say it first. Do 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 double. Do 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 double. All right, now the last phrase, this one's got a lot of twists and turns. All right, so now we're gonna go through a full etude. This etude is from my Approach Note Etudes book. This one's called All the Things You Could Be, based on a very familiar set of chord changes you'll see. And this one, I'm just going to sing through the whole thing so you can hear the pronunciations of the articulation patterns, and then I'll play through it after that. Do 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 ba da do la da da do do da da do do da do da do da la ba do ba do be do do la do ba do ba ti do la do ba ti do do la ba do la do ba ti bu bu ti do 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 da da do ba da da do da ba do do. Do 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 So in general, when you see books like this, the articulations aren't written because it's really impossible to write articulations on jazz given the standard Western notation method. So that's why really the best we could do is write out some syllables like this. But know that you don't necessarily need to have these written out syllables over every etude and transcription that you do. I would really try to make the focus on just isolating individual phrases, pronouncing them, and then playing it from there. And also really spend the majority of your time trying to apply this to exercises, and then again isolating the phrases so you can really just kind of take small little pieces where you get the hang of it. And then once you get the hang of it, you're going to be able to translate this to full solos and full etudes a lot more naturally. All right, so now we're going to talk about transcription a little bit. And so we want to apply all these same techniques that we've been learning, especially the techniques from the phrases and the etudes, into the transcription element of practicing articulation. And the more that you practice this stuff, the more you'll also absorb when you hear the legends playing with these articulations. So it's great that everything kind of works together in this process. So we're going to start by checking out a Dexter Gordon solo that I love. We're just going to check out a portion of it so we can really spend time on this one section and really absorb his articulation on this one section. So we're going to check out the bridge of his solo on Love for Sale off of the amazing album Go. So in this bridge, we're going to see some classic Dexter articulation. And I want to be clear about one thing, because there is this kind of, myth about Dexter that he tongued every note. And that's actually not necessarily true. He would tongue every note at slower tempos. Like on 3 o'clock in the morning, that track, you can really hear him tonguing just about every note at those slow tempos. But at more medium and fast tempos, he did really what so many of the jazz legends did, if not all of them, these combinations of the doo-doo-doos and the doo-ta-oo-ta-oos. He would just do a really heavy articulation. He had a really fat way of articulating what he would play, so it sounds really thick. And the nature of these doo-doo-doo articulations is you do end up articulating just about every note. If you think about it, when you go doo-doo-doo, your tongue actually goes on the reed for every single note. It goes do-do, do-do. So every single note is being articulated. So we're going to check out his solo from the bridge of the first chorus on Love for Sale. That's going to sound like this. All right, so now let's check this out phrase by phrase. So to start, we've got, our typical jazz line where we've got a mix of going up and down, and we can apply these doo-doos and doo-ta-oos. So the way it's going to apply here is we're going to have doo-doo-doo-da-da-da-da, doo-doo-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Then next, we're going to have triplets, where there are a couple different ways you can do this. You could just sort of slur through it and go doo-doo-doo, doo-doo-doo. But I would try to get your tongue in there a little bit and go doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. Do-do-do-do-do. So that kind of comes back to the way that we were articulating the triplets earlier. And then going on from there, we got do-do-do-do-da-da, do-ya, do-ya-da, do-do-do, do-do-do. That last part. Do-do-do. So he is definitely tonguing a lot of notes here, but it's not every single note. It's a lot of doo-doos and a lot of doo-da-oos. So now I'm going to play through this bridge real slow. Now one more time up to tempo. It's a really great solo and a really great opportunity to analyze Dexter's wonderful articulation approach, which to me just follows the typical uniform approach here that we've been working on during the session. And really he just played with a very heavy, thick, fat articulation, which made it feel really awesome. Now this is my opinion here, but to me, the myth that Dexter played really behind the beat isn't necessarily true. To me, Dexter was right down the middle, and he actually really played super even with his eighth notes right down the middle, but he would play them super legato, so really even eighth notes, really legato with thick, wide, fat articulations. So I don't think that he was really playing behind the beat. There were definitely some examples of that, but I think in most of the classic recordings, I think he was really just right in the middle. And then the rest of the legendary saxophonists that we know and love typically pushed a little bit more. All right, so now to finish up, we're going to check out a Charlie Parker transcription. This one is really going to be kind of the ultimate goal here, to get the Charlie Parker articulations down. And really, again, to me, it's all this uniform do-and-do-and-do's and do-da-oo-da-oo's, except he had so much rhythmic embellishment that he had a bunch of triplets and a bunch of 16th notes in there. He was just a true master, the master of all masters, definitely my hero. So we're going to check out, we're going to do the same thing as what we did on this Dexter transcription, except we're going to play this whole solo because it's just a one chorus solo. Charlie Parker had so many one chorus gems, I like to call them. Just these perfectly constructed, perfectly phrased, incredible lines throughout, one chorus solos. And so we're going to check out his solo on Yardbird Suite. So first, I'm just going to play the solo down, and then we'll talk about each phrase. I'll pronounce each phrase, and then play the whole thing slow. So we'll just do that same method that we did for the Dexter Gordon solo. So first, just going to play the whole solo down, just about up to tempo, a little under tempo from where he played it. All right, so now I'll sing through this first phrase slowly. We've got do-ba-doo-da-da-doo-da-da, do-ba-doo-da-da-doo-da-da. Take it down the octave. Ba-ba-doo-da-da-doo-da-da, da-ba-doo-da-da-doo-da-da. Real slow now. 3, 4, 1, 2. Da-ba-doo-da-da-doo-da-da, zabba-doo-da-da-doo-da-da, zabba-doo-da-da-doo-da-da. So if you want, what I would suggest is you actually tongue those first two notes as you're hearing. Da-ba-doo-da-da-da-da. Again, this is what's so hard about Charlie Parker, was that he had so many rhythmic embellishments. So I try to tongue those first two notes. Zabba-doo-da-da-da-da. Then you can really kind of slur through that 16th note grouping. Zabba-doo-da-da-da-da. Actually, I take that back. You should try to get the lower note if you can. So da-da-doo, da-ba-doo, da-da-doo, da-do, ba-da-doo, da-da-doo, ba-da-doo, da-da-doo, da-do, zabba-da-doo-da-do. You can tongue those first two notes if you want, but I would probably just go da-da-da-da-da and not tongue until the lower note. da 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 da. But if you want, you could tongue those first two notes. Da 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 da. I'm kind of getting a little tongue in there. So I'm kind of tonguing that second note as well as the first, of course. So this is going to be a rare exception when we dip down and go da-oo-doo-dee-ah. I'm actually, even though we're doing, an offbeat into the downbeat, right there, I'm not going to go in-do. I'm going to go da-oo-doo, da-oo-doo. So this is a very rare kind of exception to the rule where I believe Charlie Parker actually went da-oo-doo. So he did, slur that downbeat, even though he's going up into it, and he went da-oo-doo. But then in the following part, as you can see, he goes do into the downbeat there. Da-oo-doo. Da-oo-doo, da-oo-da. Da-oo-da, da-oo-doo, da-oo-da. Da-oo-da, da-oo-doo, da-oo-da. Da ta hooden do ta, da ta hooden do ta, da ta hooden do ta. So again, we've got these triplets. This comes back to the triplet exercise before. So again, when you get these exercises down, it makes it so much easier to apply it to every phrase when you're breaking down the solo like this. So basa da da dooden do da da dooden do dooden da. We're coming back to that triplet exercise before we had the dooden da dooden da dooden da. So those are really common. He would go do do da da do da do do da do. So when he would go do da do do, you would tongue those first two notes do da do da. So you tongue those first two notes and then slur after that. And then you're just doing offbeats from there. Now when we get to that ornament, the da, it's up to you. You could come in on the downbeat of that and go da, or you could do the offbeat going in and just slur through the whole thing. I think Charlie Parker went. I think he came in on the downbeat. So, one lesson here so far is that there's this common myth that we talked about from the beginning, this misconception that jazz is always articulating on the offbeats. But in reality, a lot of times we really come in on those downbeats to help really kind of ground the tempo and make it feel good by, still kind of locking into the center of the time, which the pulse is still downbeats. So now that whole first phrase, it's a long one. Now in slow motion. Next phrase is a really common Charlie Parker singable line. Just straightforward. Next phrase is do da da do da da. Mostly do da to start, but we go do, 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 do. There's a do. Oh, sorry. Actually, this one keeps on going through, so it's do, 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 do. Or so we came to the same thing that we just mentioned about this exception of sometimes when you jump down a note, even though it goes up into a downbeat, when you come from above and then jump down, like we do that from that concert, E down to the A into the B flat, when we jump down, it might be a little hard to go do into that downbeat. So we could go do 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 like we do there. Or we could go do do do. Either way, I think Bird went do do do. Do 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 ba do ba da. Do 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 da da. Do do ah do do ah do do ah. There, just tongues those, the anaphor into the downbeat. Do ah. You could go to do ah, or you could go do ah. Again, a lot of times it's just, there are a couple good options and you can decide between the two. In real time, you're not deciding this stuff though, because again, this comes from isolating one phrase at a time to the point where you're able to really, get a hang of this language and going through the exercises that we went through earlier. So individual phrases, exercises, and this stuff will start to lock in naturally. Don't worry, you are not going to be thinking for your whole life, and you're not going to be thinking for a whole solo every moment you're improvising of every single specific, articulation. You're going to get these down in a, with a micro approach, just, one little step at a time, one little bit by bit, and then eventually you're able to just speak the language. Now going on to the bridge. Do 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 do. It's up to you whether you articulate that second beat, do do do, or do do. Yeah, either way is fine. Do 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 do. But notice we have kind of another exception here where, Charlie Parker would sometimes do these offbeats articulations going up depending on the line. And here I think he did. But then when he lands on the downbeat, he goes, dwee. And then he hits it. You could go, but I think here he did do the offbeats. Either way works though. Both are fair game. The important thing is to be able to do, each method, and then you pick in the spirit of the moment. Then going on. And again, all of this is just variations of these do-and-dos and do-da-oo-da-oos, with the occasional exception of to the rule where maybe we'll do the offbeats going up. But the important thing, the overarching idea here is to just be able to do these approaches, and then eventually when you're speaking language fluently, be able to just decide, in the spirit of the moment. And it won't be a conscious thing, when you get out of the practice room and you're just having fun and playing. All right, now I'll just play through the last A. So now I'll do the whole solo really slow. And up to tempo to finish up. Alright guys, thanks so much for watching this masterclass session on articulation. I hope you enjoyed the experience, and make sure to come back to this more and more as you're practicing and trying to get the hang of it. Remember, isolate, take just a few notes at a time, take it very, very slow, be patient with the process, and in just a few weeks it should really start to absorb into your playing gradually, and then eventually you don't even have to think about it and you just have fun, which is always the goal here. So thanks again for watching, thanks again for getting the masterclass, and I'll see you guys next time.